In this lesson we're going to look at color concepts. We're going to look at an understanding of how color is rendered in a digital image and what tools you have at your disposal to enhance the color within an image. So in order to do this, we're just going to open an image quickly, and I'm going to use a recent image, and this image called Fields, and we'll be looking at the tools that will help us enhance the color rendering within this image. So to understand the basic concept of color rendering, we can go to the dialog box here and open up the channels dialog, and you will see that you've got three monochrome images rendering in red, green and blue. Now if I switch off the visibility of the blue and the green channels, you will see that we have a red channel and a black and white image is rendered behind that red. Wherever the image is black, no red will shine through. Wherever the image is white, red will be allowed through in its full pure colour. The same will apply to the green channel and in its turn the blue channel. So when we mix these three channels together, we end up with a full colour image. So behind that we also have the black and white tonal value of the image, and that is represented by this dialog here in the histogram. And the bottom left hand corner represents the black areas of the image, and the bottom right hand corner represents the white. And these peaks here are showing us the amount of data that is recorded at that particular tonal value. In this image, most of the data is recorded in the mid-range on the image, and there's nothing in the black areas or in the white areas, which is giving us this flat, misty type of image. But that's not a bad thing, because once we don't have any data down in completely black areas and over in the completely white areas, it means that there's detail throughout the image, and we can then enhance and render that and improve the overall look of the image. So in order to do that, I need to go to the colors menu, and in the colors menu I have two tools at my disposal. I've got levels and I've got curves. The first one we're going to look at is levels. So if I open the levels dialog box, you can see that the histogram is rendered here again, and we have our black, our mid-range and our white sliders available to us. And what we're going to do is quite simply take this black slider, and by clicking and dragging I can move the slider across the histogram to a point where I meet the first piece of data. So you can see roughly where the curve of the histogram comes down to the 0 value, and you can see that that has darkened the image overall. I might just back that off just a little bit. We don't want to go too dark. Now I can take the white slider and do exactly the same with it, monitoring the image as I go. Now the dynamic range of the image goes from this point here to this point here, and I can use the grey slider, and if I move it towards the black, the image brightens up, and if I move it towards the white, the image darkens down again. And basically what that's doing is it's allowing the values between black and mid-grey to be increased or decreased. So there's more space between the grey slider and the white slider. The image is naturally going to be brighter because these are all in mid-tones, the highlights. If I move it to the left, the image is going to get darker because all of this data is now between black and the mid-tones. So by subtly playing with that, you can get a rendering of the dynamic range of the image which is pleasing to your eye. And at the bottom of this dialog box I have a preview button, and I can switch the preview off and I can see the original image, and I can switch the preview back on and I can see what we've achieved simply by moving those three sliders. I'm just going to say OK to that. We're now going to go into colors again, the colors menu, and go to curves this time. Once the curves dialog box opens, you will notice that there are differences between this and the levels dialog box which we looked at a moment ago. In this box, the black to white range is rendered across the diagram, and you can see the histogram is still here, and we have output values from black to pure white rising vertically and going from left to right. What the curves dialog box allows you to do is to actually change the value of colors within an image on all three channels. You actually have a fourth channel there, which is this value channel. The overall channel, which is represented by this black line across the image. In other words, this is the RGB combined channel. And if I use the drop down menu here, you will see that I have access to the red, green and the blue channels. And we're going to begin with the green channel because we've got a lot of green grass in the background there, and we're going to try and improve the look of that grass. So by going to the green channel, you'll see there's a slight shift in the histogram, and this vertical there has now become from black to green. And by using the mouse, I can click and drag a point on this line, and I'm just going to move that up slightly, and you'll see that it has a brightening effect on the grass. It also has some effect on the corn in the foreground. I'll just move this box slightly to one side. You'll see over here that there's shadows within the grass area, and there's also some shadows here, and I want to render them a little bit deeper. So I'm going to take some of the slider here and I'm going to drag the line down in the darker areas, not too much, and you'll see that the shadows render a little bit deeper than they did a moment ago. So that gives me a good tonal range across the green grass. And because, as you understand, each colour is rendered in red, blue and green, each adjustment that you make on these lines will have an effect across the whole range of colours, so you need to be fairly subtle in what you're doing. I'm going to go now to the blue channel and we're going to fix the sky. So I'm just going to add a little bit of brightness into that, and you can see it turning a paler blue, and I might take some of the dark end out again as well, just so that doesn't have too much effect on the grass and the corn in the foreground. Now I'm selecting the points for these corrections on the lines fairly randomly, but this grid allows me to know that this is the top tonal area of the image up towards the whites. The mid-tones are around here, around the center area, and it moves towards shadows. But if you place a point on a line and you then realize I didn't need that point there, if you just drag it to the side, it will actually ping off the line and the line will resume its original position. So I can actually take those 2 points away that we had on earlier, and you can see, just like an elastic band, it pings back into place. So we'll just reposition those points. So you click and drag, and that will position. You're resetting the values along that line for that specific color across the entire image. So if we now go to the red channel, and we're going to use this to try and enhance the corn area here. It's gone a little bit red here in the shadows, so I'm going to reduce the red values down in the shadows area, and you'll see that that goes a little bit grayer. We might just put a little bit back in there just to keep it a warm tone to it. And I'm going to brighten up the highlights again. Now you'll notice I've brightened up the highlights in most of the adjustments that I've done here. That's basically because I want to create that sun-kissed effect that we have highlights and we also have shadows. So I'm increasing the contrast between the highlights and the shadows by making these corrections. And now if I go back to the value channel, you will see those 3 lines are now stepping outside the original black line, and you can see the adjustments that you've made to the red, green and blue channels independently. So the final adjustment I'm going to make is increase the overall contrast of the whole image by moving the values channel, and again I'm going to increase the highlights and I'm going to bring back down the shadows. And this curve that you see in the line, you will hear this in the literature as a lazy S curve, and it's a very good way to get a good contrast across your image, just to put that sort of gentle S shape into your image. Now you will need to play with it just a little bit to get it to where you want it to be, and I'm reasonably happy with that. Now if I switch off the curves preview, I can see there's where the image was when we finished with levels, and now we've added a curves correction to it as well, and you can see there's a few richer tones in the image. So we'll just say OK to curves and the dialog box closes. I can now go back to the undo history and do a general review of what we've done. We brought in this image here and we went into levels and we corrected the tonal range across the image, and it gave us this result. We then went into curves and made a few color corrections to give us this final image here. In this image there's detail throughout the image, even if it was originally in this dull and drab state. We've been able to bring forward color and shadow and detail within the image simply by using the levels and the curves tools within the colors menu. So if I now close that image, I'm going to open another image, tramway, and we're going to use the levels tool to correct this image, and we'll go into colors and levels, and in this levels dialog box we can select the black point, the white point and the grey point with an image. So I have two ways I can do this: pick the black point, or I can pick the white point. I also have 3 pickers. I have a black point picker here, grey point and white point. I also have an auto tool. If I click on auto, GIMP will decide how that image should be corrected. So I'm going to reset that, and I'm going to pick the black point tool, and I know this cable should be black, so I'm going to click here and render that as black. Now basically what I've done is I've reset the RGB values for this color to 0, 0, 0. So if that is the case, then all of the colors in the image are readjusted based on that data. So if I pick the white point, and for example I could say that that person there is wearing a white jumper, I can click on that and you can see it brightens the image slightly, but I now have a preset white point and the black point has not changed color. Still within that dialog box, I can now take the grey slider in the middle. If I move it towards the black, the image will brighten. If I move it towards the white, the image will darken. There's the preview button again, just to see what we've achieved. So there was the original image coming in, and I think you'll agree, once those corrections were made, the image has been enhanced. So if I just say OK to that, that image has been corrected in 2 simple clicks from there to there. So the levels and curves tools, which are in your colors menu, they're very, very powerful tools. It takes a little practice to get your head around them and understand exactly what they are doing, but once you grasp them, they are very, very powerful tools, and they will do a lot to enhance your image output.